Hey guys, welcome to the Sua Sponte podcast. I'm Ken Harper, and today is with me JC Glick. He's the CEO of Commit Foundation. He was a prior Ranger. He served in the military, in the Army for 20 years, in the regiment for 9 years, and he also competed in the Best Ranger 2 times. Sir, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so we wanted to develop this podcast just to try to give guys examples of what guys do beyond their military service. Are there any things that you wanted to add to your military service? Just what we went over?
No, I think I was really fortunate. It was my time in the regiment that was really foundational to everything. So they had to force me to leave as a lieutenant. As a captain rather, junior captain, JV captain we called it back then. And then I came back as soon as my first command was over, and again, staff, and I guess if I could have done it any longer, I would have kept commanding Rangers, but I had to go to school. But it was, I love the regiment. It's always going to have a special place for me.
Yeah, it always will. Um, so, sir, what are some things that you've gotten or done since you've gotten out of the military that are kind of developed you into who you are today?
What's funny is, as you say that, I think about, the the regiment developed me into who I am today. And what I continue to do is refine that now, refine what I was taught in the regiment. And quite honestly, probably too immature because of youth and because of ego to really harness it and really make it meaningful. When I think I told somebody recently, I'm a much better Ranger now than I was when I was in the regiment. And I think that's, I feel bad about that, but I'm also really glad about that. I think that since I've been out, what I've really tried to do is I've taken our creed and I've really tried to live by that as an aspirational code, right? I know that I'm going to consistently, and that's something I think that maybe we don't realize as young Rangers, like the creed is aspirational and you're going to fail at living the creed every day. And that's why you got good leaders to kind of pick you up, and you got good Ranger buddies to kind of help you because you're gonna screw it up. And when you leave the regiment, we talk about when you're in service and you continue to wear the uniform, Abrams Charter, and how you still have to like reflect positively upon the regiment. Never shall I embarrass my Ranger regiment, but what I don't know that we talk enough about is after you get out and there's really no identity, like you've lost kind of your identity. You're no longer a Ranger, but you still represent the Rangers. That's how people see you. I mean, I know that people say like, oh, JC Glick, former Army Ranger. And so now almost more than ever, I feel like I have to uphold parts of the creed. So I've really tried to be really thoughtful in what I did. So I've been a consultant. I've done that I did that for about 8 years, working with mostly professional sports teams, mostly the NFL, but some NBA, a lot of NCAA teams, and helping with culture and leadership and helping them to understand how you get people to do great things. I've worked with Fortune 500 companies as well, with my partner Jim Stagnita to at Padromos Leadership, and really getting people to understand how to develop a deliberate culture like what we had in the regiment. I've written a couple of books, A Light in the Darkness, which is about preparing people for the unknown, because I think our education system doesn't necessarily prepare people for the unknown. It prepares them to solve problems that have already been solved, right? Like, so here's how we do this thing. Okay, now you know how to do it. Okay, you're certified or you're qualified, as opposed to, hey, this is a really big, wicked problem. Do you know how to solve it? So I talk about that, all stuff that I learned from NCOs in the regiment. And then I was fortunate enough to write a book called Meditations of an Army Ranger, And that was really about things that I had learned throughout my time in the military and in combat, and share that. That did really well. And then I just finished my third book, which will be published this summer, which is The Gridiron Way, which is kind of the philosophy. Frank Savino's The Gridiron Way, which is about this guy, Frank Savino, who created kind of this philosophy of lifting heavy things and how it's for everybody. So I've done all these things, and whenever I do it, and you can ask Mike Hall, like before I published Meditations of an Army Ranger, which I wanted to make sure that the regimental crest was, shown on. He said, I want to make sure that this represents the regiment correctly, because when the crest goes on it represents Rangers, not just me. It represents Rangers. And, I really wanted to be really thoughtful. So I showed it to Mike Hall, and I think he's been kind of the keeper for us of kind of what the regiment needs to continue to do. But I showed it to some other Rangers to make sure that they wouldn't be embarrassed by anything I put in there, or it dishonored the regiment in any way. But then what I found was I was missing something. So I was very, very fortunate to find the Commit Foundation, which takes, the top tier veterans and helps them continue to have impact once they get out of uniform, helps them with identity, helps them with purpose, helps them with tribe, all things we lose. And quite honestly, we found that kind of our highest performing service members have the most difficulty transitioning. They struggle with all three of those things, but they really struggle because they're used to performing and they're used to being around a whole bunch of high performers, and people don't necessarily know what to do with guys like that, guys and girls like that. So I was really fortunate to find a great tribe in Commit, with a great mission. So I'm really excited. So that's kind of what I've been looking for, something like Commit for a really long time. And I was really, really happy to find it.
Well, and I think that's good what you said about that aspiration, because I think we all have that hindsight where we can look back and say, I wish I would have done this better. And I think that's part of what we want to do at this podcast, right? And recently in your most recent, well, not your most recent article, but you talk about being a better leader and being a better human and understanding the flaws that humans have and being able to overcome that. And I think that is something we all have when we leave regiment. We all know we could have done things better. We wish we would have done things better. And I think that's great to talk about. And hopefully young Rangers will think about that, and Ranger leaders will discuss that more with young Rangers.
I think it's really important. I was actually just talking to a friend. I mean, literally this afternoon, we were talking about this. He went and spoke to some cadets who were talking about an honor code, and somebody came up in the conversation who they felt violated the code, their honor code at one point in time. And we're soured on the individual because of it. And I was like, boy, I don't ever want to be judged for the mistakes that I made in the past. I want to be judged for who I am today. I think that if there's a difference between judging and being judgmental, right? So I can judge an act and say, hey, that act was not good. You shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. Like judging something, that's what we do as humans, and we should judge. There's nothing wrong with judging things. There is a problem when you place judgment on a person because of that act. And I always tell leaders, you gotta judge the act, not the actor. So one act does not make a bad actor for the rest of his life. And if we're going to have that kind of standard, nobody's going to be successful. We'll have no, as I wrote, we'll have no heroes if we're looking for that perfect person who doesn't screw up at all. Good luck with that. And I got to be honest with you, I'm not sure I want to follow that person, because one, I figure that they've screwed up somewhere along the way. Otherwise, how would they get there? And so they're hiding it real well, or if they haven't screwed up at all, how do they have any empathy for those of us that do screw up? And I mean, I tell people all the time, I probably failed in the Ranger Creed once a day. But the important thing is I had something to measure myself against and say, and be able to be honest with myself and say, all right, this is where I failed the Ranger Creed. And this is what I got to do to be better at it. I think this idea of, if we are trying to live perfectly, we are not growing and getting better. And oh, by the way, not being human, because there's lots of things that we do because we're human and we make mistakes and we lead with emotion and we do all these other things, and it pulls us away from sometimes what's good. And you know what? It's okay as long as we come back to what's good. I mean, I've done things that, I can look back and say, yeah, that wasn't in accordance with the creed, and it wasn't a good thing to do. And I'm sorry that I did it, and I have a plan to not do it again.
Yeah, and I think, one of those other places other than like battalion or like even going to church, like church is really one of those black and white places where it's right and wrong, is the gym. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of structure there. It's like you're either meeting the standard or you're not, and it's
True.
It's black and white.
It is.
And I think
the outcome is black and white, but the rationale is not always black and white, right? Like, hey, I either make 225 for 10 reps or I don't. But if I didn't eat breakfast that morning, like there can be reasons that are not excuses, right? A reason isn't always an excuse. Sometimes it's a rationale because something didn't work out. And then falling short in the standard, can you make sure that you don't do those things? Make sure I ate breakfast, I got a good night's sleep, right? To ensure, because the cost of not meeting the standard, especially when you're at the regiment, but in life, is somebody else is carrying your rucksack. And so you care about your teammates. And that's, I don't know, as a society that we're so good at that, which is why I think it's hard for Rangers to leave, because they go to a place where you will not have the same brotherhood that you did in the regiment.
Well, yeah, because you never have to worry about, when I'm struggling, is someone going to be there to help me, because someone's going to be there to help you. But in civilian society, that's not necessarily true, because sometimes you have people that genuinely want to help you, and then sometimes you have people that genuinely they want to harm you just to make themselves look better.
I think there are some of those people. And I also think you have those people that are in the middle that, they're trying to live their lives, and that's a struggle for them. And they don't, when I struggled after transition, I think there were a lot of people that later on told me I didn't know how to help you. And I get that, right? Like they didn't even ask, and that's okay because they didn't know. I mean, I think part of it is we had a certain amount of grace for guys in the regiment when they failed, right? I mean, and I will tell you, I when I first came into the regiment in the 90s, we didn't have grace for guys who failed, like, at all. When you failed and the black schnook came, you were gone, and everybody was kind of celebrating that we got rid of a turd, no matter how good that person had been up to that point. After 2001, I watched us learn how to really develop Ranger, right? How do you, hey, you made a mistake. Okay, let's figure out how this Ranger has been good to this point. Let's not make one mistake. That old saying, one aw shit erases a whole bunch of attaboys.
Yeah.
We got out of that. Like, it shouldn't, and it doesn't, right? I mean, if you're a good performer, you get a certain amount of grace. Right? If you're a crappy performer, you're gone when you make a mistake. But if you're a good performer and you screw up or you make a mistake, I think it's it's imperative that leaders help you, like, get past that mistake.
Yeah, I think that's one thing. Since I've left Ranger Regiment in 2013, they've only progressed and gotten that much better in is understanding that sometimes guys make mistakes not because they want to, they just don't have the resources to know that there was an alternative.
Yeah.
So what are some things that you use in your daily life currently to stay mentally alert to just the situation around you?
So it's an interesting question, because like only in a regiment would we think about it that way. But so one, I hate to say this, but I get enough sleep. Like that is
Yeah.
something that I get 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, regardless. Like I will get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And I think that is part of what keeps me mentally alert. The other piece is I do a lot of nutrition around brain health, right? So like, look, I drink this thing called Kinetic. Um, that's it right there. It's actually, so it's a ketone drink that legitimately like puts your brain in a more focused state. So ketones. So I don't want to go on a keto diet because I don't want to lose like 20 pounds in like 3 weeks. I just want ketones that help stimulate my brain. So, and they help focus. So like before I write and stuff, I read constantly, I meditate, and I think about stuff. I try not to react to stuff. I try to respond to stuff. So when I see something that gets me kind of like fired up, instead of just flying off on the handle about it, I go, okay, let me think about this thing. Let me think about all sides of it. What is the other side thinking? What are the other points that I'm missing? And I really try to be thoughtful. So, and I've found that, by doing that, between the sleep, the diet, and then the practices of just, breathing and meditation and constant reading and studying and learning, I continue to try to keep my mind sharp, which gets scarier and scarier the older you get. Like you don't want to like lose anything. So, that's, I really try to, I think that mentally alert thing is, are we lifelong learners in all things, right? And in economics and social studies, and just how do we live with our partner? How do we live with our children? Are we being thoughtful and deliberate in our thinking when it comes to the world around us? Because we were, when we were in the regiment, right? Everything was very thoughtful. It was very deliberate. We knew exactly what we were doing and why we were doing it. And we were thinking about not the move we were in, but what was the next move? What was the next thing we were doing? How were we going to do that? What was going to set us up for success? And that's not really necessary in the civilian world, because we live in like a Nerf world, I call it. Like it's not really dangerous. So to do that, to be thoughtful, to be deliberately thoughtful in the way you're thinking towards action is a rarity. And to keep that up, because it's way too easy to let the brain go, and just because again, there's nothing hard about life. Becomes much easier. So what are the ways that you challenge yourself so that you can stay mentally alert? But it's a neat question.
Yeah, I think kind of what I hear too is not only you think about things, but it sounds like you reflect on them. As in, like, this is what I just came through. How could I have done it better? Or how can I think about, how that person responded to me this way is probably because of something in their life. I think that's a good way to think of things, in addition to just thinking, but also reflecting.
I like how you said that. And I think that's absolutely right, Ken. I think one of the things that hurt the entire soft community is this idea of thinking that you have to attack every day and you have to attack every problem and, burn the boats and all this nonsense, which is not the soft that you and I grew up in, which was, how do I solve this problem? How do I work with this individual? Not everything is an adversary. I mean, a lot of things are allies. And if we treat everything as an adversary, man, life is tiring and it's always a fight. And I think being able to understand other people help make us better leaders for the community. And I think we continue to be called to lead. I think this podcast is a great example of that. You continue to be called to lead. This is your vehicle to lead. And you have to be able to talk to a whole bunch of different kinds of people to do that.
Well, and I've been reflecting lately on just World War II and the Japanese, and how often the kamikaze fighters would kill themselves, or a general would go down with a ship. And just, I feel like it was a disservice to the Japanese, but it was great for us because
my wife's the only one that breaks through when she calls. So sorry about that.
But it was a great service for the Americans, because they were losing battlefield knowledge when those people were dying in those battles and killing themselves. And I understand, but it gets back to kind of what we're talking about, is that being humble and being able to, maybe if you're hurt, take yourself out of the fight. Like, you shouldn't go back out on target with a broken leg, because you're hindering everybody else, not just yourself. And so I think that reflection and just being humble enough to say, hey, look, I'm not at full speed right now. I need some time to evaluate and catch up and reflect, and then I'll come back stronger, probably better.
I think, I wrote about, not too long ago, maybe about a year or 2 years ago, I wrote about this silly military idea of honor in death itself. That there was honor in death itself, till Valhalla kind of idea. And okay, let's just make the assumption there's honor in death, but is there not honor in life? Is there not honor in being able to pass on your knowledge? Is there not honor in being able to make the world around you better from what you've suffered or what you've experienced? Is there not honor in hope? And I think that we have overemphasized kind of this honor in death, much like you mentioned the kamikazes, right? That was it. It was about honor in death. And I think that, we have a subculture in the military that, it's with your shield or on it kind of thing. And okay, but with your shield can look like a whole bunch of different things. And let's really talk about that, because I don't know that the world is better without people in it. It's one thing to die in combat. It's another thing to die senselessly. And I think that's something that we have to talk about, and we have to be thoughtful about, because I think I'm not saying it's a shame, right? If you, there's nothing shameful about the thought, but I don't know that we elevate it to honor. I think that it's, I think that we have to be really thoughtful on, if you made it through. I mean, I don't know, most Rangers are multiple deployments, right? And I look at most of those Rangers, you come back after multiple deployments, 5, 7, 9, 14, whatever it is. To come back and not realize that there must be some reason that you made it through all those things, that you need to be around and continue to, there's honor in that. There's a lot of honor in that. And I think, and honestly, this comes from, like, I attempted suicide 4 times, 2 times while I was in uniform and 2 times when I got out. And I saw it as a solution, and it wasn't a solution. It wasn't the solution I needed. It wasn't the solution my family needed, but it was an immediate solution. And we think we got to fix things, right? They're broken. I got to fix this. And the thing that was broken was me. And the solution was not selfish. It was actually, I was thinking it was for other people. And the truth was, it was a solution. It was a suboptimal solution, a very suboptimal solution. And having the ability to figure it out and understanding what my legacy has been since those attempts, well, that's honorable. Like, I can look back and be like, yeah, I've been at my kid's graduation, and I've been there, like, if my kids needed me, and I'm here with my wife and my friends, and I'm, I think that's really important. And I don't know that we honor that as much as we should.
Yeah, it's hard because we're often, like you're saying, looking for the instant fix rather than kind of looking down the road to that further, where do we want to be or where are we trying to get to? And that can be hard in the moment, especially, like you went back to originally, like staying mentally alert, getting proper sleep, resting, reflecting, focusing on what's important rather than focusing on that immediate problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know, well, you recently just turned 54, right? I saw you
53. 53.
53.
Don't put another year on me, man. 53.
Sorry, 53. So I saw you did 53, 225, and you ran a couple miles. And so what do you do to stay physically fit? Do you just make your own workout plans up, or you follow anything?
I work with a trainer, once a week. I squat with a guy who's like a strongman guy, because I think we always need to be coached. I do kind of build my own workouts, or I find like there's a bunch of really good workouts. There's a bunch of former Rangers who put out some really great workout stuff. And I find something and I go, hey, I like this. I really like German volume training, so I do usually sometime during the year I'll probably do 8 weeks of German volume training. I like to continue to, I road march twice a week. I still do kit runs. I still, do pull-ups in kit. I, run through the woods. I like that stuff. And I remember I felt good after I was done with that stuff. So I didn't see any reason to stop doing it. Now I will tell you, I use a ice bath, afterwards. But I think that, I'm thinking about writing this piece right now about, do we fight aging? Do we grow old gracefully? Or do we increase longevity, right? So if we think about a weapon system, right? We don't fight the weapon system going bad, and we don't let the weapon system age at its own pace, like whatever. We maintain it. We figure out how to extend the longevity of a piece of equipment. And I think that's kind of what I'm doing, is I'm trying to figure out, how do I extend the longevity of this piece of equipment that's the physiological part of who I am, right? And with some years of not knowing, or the science hadn't really been perfected on how do you do this. So I'm a big believer in, continue to, and the one thing I tell everybody who gets out is, physical fitness has to remain part of who you are. It was, I don't care if you weren't like the most physically fit person in the world, which certainly wasn't any of the Rangers, but if you were in uniform, you absolutely had to be, it was part of what, your daily routine. That doesn't have to stop when you transition. It shouldn't. And I think we see a lot of health problems because guys are allowing their bodies to atrophy. They're not thinking of the longevity of the piece of equipment.
Yeah, that's one of those priority things. You just got to make time for it, which it can be harder in the civilian world, but you just have to do it. I mean, at the end of the day, we all get a lunch break. You get time before work, time after work. It's just fitting it in there. So I know I asked you mentally alert. So this one, I mean, I don't know what you use for it, but so what would you say you use to keep yourself like morally straight?
Yeah, I think this is the toughest one, to be honest with you. Because mentally alert, there's a benefit to that. Like there's an instant user benefit to that, right?
Yeah.
Physically strong, user benefit to that. Morally straight, hard to find that, like, other than feeling good about yourself, which sometimes you forget, and you wonder if that's, true humility. I think this is the toughest one. So I'll tell you what I think about is, we can never really know ourselves, right? If you think about it, like I can know what you think of me, I can know what my wife thinks of me. I can know the kind of person that I want to show up as and try to act in accordance with the way I think that will be reflected by others. But how you see me is how you see me. I could think, well, if I open the door for him, he'll think I'm polite. You may not think that that's a measure of politeness, right? So I can only do those things. So what I really try to think about is how can I make somebody else's day better? How can I make sure that I don't intentionally hurt anyone else? How can I make sure that I'm doing quote unquote good things, right? Or something that actually is a positive to my community or my world or whatever. And I think and I really think about it, like, and I really go into most interactions thinking about very deliberately that, because I desire to be a good person. I really do. But I think most people do. And I think that I have the luxury of thinking about how to do that probably more than someone else who might have a whole bunch of other things to worry about that I don't have to worry about. And I think that if I can try to be a good person and try to make others' lives better, and try to do that, not lie, cheat, or steal, I think that's the best I can do. And I think that if I'm unsure of any of the three of them, it's always the morally straight one that I always worry about. I also have a really good ranger buddy in my wife who kind of helps me. She's also a lawyer, who also kind of keeps me on that. But I think, I think of some things that, I was challenged the other day. Like I was asked advice of somebody and I was like, well, I think you ought to do this. And they asked it back to me. And the way I had presented it, it sounded like I told them to not be 100% honest with someone. And I was like, oh yeah, that's not what I meant. But that's absolutely, you're right. That's exactly how it sounds. And I think that, again, that's the hardest one, right? Here's what I like about this part of the creed. I will shoulder more than my share of the task. And I think that's it. When all else fails, if I'm ever in doubt, how can I help? How can I help my ranger buddy? Right? Because I will tell you that the ranger buddies that I hold in the highest esteem are the ones that were always there for me. And I can't tell you if some of them maybe physically studs, some of them super smart, but smart and physical stud. I mean, that's pretty much all you got at the regiment. Well, back in the 90s, we had some that weren't so smart, but they were good dudes. But that morally straight, I never knew what was in anybody's heart when they left the regiment, right? I just didn't. But I knew while we were together, like they were my ranger buddy and I was their ranger buddy. And we were the two most important things, in the world to each other. And I think that's the key is who's your ranger buddy and are you there for them? Because who's morals, right? I look at the current situation in, Israel and Gaza, right? You got half of the population that thinks the Palestinians are right and half the population that thinks that the Israelis are right, morally correct, right? I mean, like this, they're moral. Both sides think the other is that they are morally right.
Yeah.
Well, who is? So instead of worrying so much about what's morally right, I worry about, am I there for my ranger buddies? Am I making sure that I'm doing the things that are aligned with my values and what I think is important, and that they align with the values of the people close to me? Because that
and I think for me, morally straight, because I'm a Christian, I believe that it would be to love your neighbor as yourself. And so that could be anybody. And that's essentially what you're saying is loving that other person. But I think I totally agree with what you're saying is it is a struggle for me to know my own heart sometimes, because we often make exceptions for ourselves that we don't make for others. And so it's hard to be honest with yourself sometimes, because you want to act like you know better because it's for yourself, but you also blind yourself at the same time.
And even when we look at others who make mistakes, moral mistakes that we find morally reprehensible, we don't know what led that individual to make that decision. So we judge that person without the full story. And I got to be honest, there's lots of situations that people are in that lead them to make decisions that on a crystal clear day, I would go, hey, I would make that decision. but I got to be honest with you, if it was raining and there were certain things going on, I don't know that I wouldn't make that same decision. I'd like to believe I wouldn't.
Yeah.
But I and that's the thing is, and we can't know somebody's heart. So I just have to make the assumption that everyone's heart is good. And if I make that assumption, if you made something that I find morally reprehensible, well, let's figure out why. Well, if I'm your ranger buddy, let's talk about it. And that doesn't in my mind vilify you forever. I think we're allowed to make mistakes. I just think we have to.
Yeah, I was thinking one thing about those is I feel like as rangers, we all kind of struggle in one of the areas, whether it's mentally alert, physically strong, or morally straight. And that outflows in different ways. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was a morally straight struggle for me with going through a divorce and stuff while I was in battalion. And a lot of guys have that struggle. But I think one thing that was helpful was to have ranger buddies. Well, actually, I had a first sergeant that was like, look, you're going to go see the battalion chaplain. And a lot of people might be offended and say, no, I don't want to do that. But at the end of the day, he did that for my good. He didn't do that because he didn't care about me. He did it because he cared about me. Just like when your team leader tells you need to get up in PT or you screwed up, like there's reasons and there's good things behind all of it.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. And I think that's what we've, I'm less concerned if you fail to one of those things. If I'm your ranger buddy, I'm going to be there to help you make it up. I'm going to be there to do PT with you. I'm going to be there to help you think through something, or I'm going to be there to help you through a moral dilemma that you have. And because being a ranger buddy is not only if you meet these criteria, right? If you wear the scroll, you're my ranger buddy. And that is a change that I really appreciated in the regiment when we went from, again, 1990s, late 1990s with me, 97, to 2001 is we started to realize it was about the scroll. It wasn't about a list of things. One of the best things, and I don't know what happened after he left, but when Birch got rid of the blue book, and it was like, the creed, live by the creed. In the creed, it's very clear we're there for each other, and it wasn't about some stark set of standards that just sit on the wall. It was about, hey, you meet these standards because you do this because you got to help your ranger buddy, and you're doing it for each other. You're not doing it so again, in the 90s, we did it so we could stay there as opposed to doing it for each other. And I think that's a beautiful evolution. And I credit, guys like Greg Birch and Votel and Nixon, who kind of, Rich Clark, those guys who made sure that happened.
Yeah. So I pulled some quotes from your article, and I feel like the one that really goes with what we're talking about right now is it said, you wrote, our flaws do not disqualify us from greatness. They humanize us, offering both a mirror to our own limitations and a window to what we can overcome. And I think our ranger buddies help us overcome that because, like I said earlier, sometimes they see things we don't see, and sometimes they can help us in areas that we don't know how to help ourselves.
100%. I think you're absolutely right. I don't really have anything to add to that except that the term ranger buddy has a very special place in my heart. Like if I call somebody my ranger buddy, I have very high thoughts of them. And I think, and I have, and I have the utmost respect for who they are, because I just think it's such an important position.
Yeah. Well, sir, I appreciate your time. And like we always say here, Rangers lead the way.
All the way.